Hi, everybody. So for this lecture, I was just talking about an essay on my previous lecture. For this lecture, we're going to be looking at how to evaluate sources. So your upcoming essay asks you to evaluate several sources on a particular topic. So I just wanted to give you sort of a quick look through of what that looks like and how you can go about doing that. So some evaluation basics. If you haven't already, make sure that you are doing all of the reading for the assigned pages from our textbook, because that will help you a lot in terms of what we do when we're evaluating sources in this way. So just some quick things to make sure that you remember from the textbook. Evaluations are basically just everyday arguments. In the most basic terms, we're applying criteria and making a decision based on that criteria. So we also need to understand what criteria is. So those are just the standards that you use to help you evaluate. And these can be all over the place. They vary a lot depending on what it is that we're evaluating. There are also a couple of different types of evaluations to know about. So the first one is quantitative evaluations. And these are things that involve criteria that can be measured in concrete ways. These are objective, not subjective. So for example, how fast a car can go, how much an object weighs, or how tall it is. Those are quantitative. There's no arguing, about how fast a car can go, or how much something weighs, or how tall it is, and so on. On the other hand, we have qualitative evaluations, and these involve criteria that is subjective and things that cannot be measured in concrete ways. These often involve morals, values, and beliefs. So, for example, what type of music is best, whether we think that puppies or kittens are cuter. Those are things that are very subjective and can't be measured in one way that everybody agrees on, so those are qualitative. And remember that evaluations can use one or both of those. So an evaluation doesn't have to be only quantitative or only qualitative. So if you want to look at either any of these terms a little bit more in depth, you can always refer back to the textbook. So some overall things that you need to do when you're developing an evaluative argument. Remember to develop claims about the topic at hand. So these are claims that you make, for instance, for your essay, you'll be claiming that a particular source goes about informing us in a particular way, for instance. Then you need to choose your criteria. For this essay, I recommend using the CRAP test criteria. If you're not familiar with that, we'll talk about it in just a minute here. And then from there, you need to choose evidence from whatever it is that you're evaluating to support your claims, and make sure that the evidence is based on the criteria that you've chosen to use. So if you're not familiar with the CRAP test, it just is a fun way of remembering that a source should be current, relevant, the authors should have authority, the information presented should be accurate, and the purpose should be clear. So when we're evaluating sources for our essay, remember that we're looking at each source to see what each one brings to our overall understanding of the topic at hand. So we are not saying that one source is good and the other is bad, for instance. Instead, I want you to get a little bit of a more complex evaluation and look at what does this source do with information? How does it present it? What kind of information is being presented? And how do all of those things help us better understand this particular topic? Remember that you can choose, you're evaluating either the sources on human trafficking or the issues surrounding the justice system. So you should not be discussing both in your essay. However, exams, quizzes, and assignments will cover both of these things, so it's important that you do read all of those sources and watch them. Remember that your overall goal is to evaluate all of the sources about your topic and discuss them cohesively to help readers see how each one helps us better understand the topic. Before you start the essay, however, it's important that you do the basics with each of those sources. So with each source, you need to read, or if it's a video, watch, annotate, and evaluate each source separately before you're ready to start planning the essay. And that's what we'll spend time doing in the next, couple weeks while we're working our way up to the essay. So we're going to do just a little bit of practice today with human trafficking sources. And the source that I've chosen to look at is this one, Hidden in Plain Sight, Human Trafficking in the United States. So by the time you're watching this lecture, you may or may not have read that one yet, depending on when it is assigned in your class. So what you should do with every source is to read and annotate the source so that you have a good understanding of the basics, right? We need to understand what the topic is, what the author's claims are. Before we can do any evaluating, we need to have a good handle on just those basics. Then you're going to choose what criteria you'll use to evaluate with. Remember that for this, I recommend using the CRAP test criteria. So we want things to be current and relevant. We want the authors to have authority and so on. Then you can complete your evaluation, and from there you'll choose which points you'll use in the essay. So just a quick overview of what we're doing when we annotate, in case annotation is still somewhat new for you. Remember that you should be writing as you read. So for all of the things that I assign, whether they're from the textbook, from an article, or even for videos, you should be writing things down as you read or watch those things. The goal here is to interact with the text. You should be asking questions, highlighting key points, writing your notes in the margins or on a separate sheet of paper, and most important for evaluating, look for the criteria that you're using so that by the time you've read through, you're ready to start your evaluation. So our example criteria is here: currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And then I've also given you just a quick visual of an annotation guide. This is one way that you can choose to annotate. And of course, if you have a different way that works for you, then go ahead and use that. But you could make a star next to an important idea. You could underline a keyword or a detail, circle something that's unfamiliar so you can look that word up. And this will happen a lot with our scholarly journal articles because a lot of them use really specialized terms. An exclamation point works well for an interesting detail, a question mark for a question, and maybe an arrow for a connection that you made. And remember that part of this essay asks you to make connections between the texts, so you definitely want to be looking for those connections as you're reading through and watching your sources. So that brings us to criteria. Remember that I recommend using the CRAP test for criteria for this evaluation. So that means that we're looking at these particular, areas as we're reading. So the first one is currency. How timely is this information? So you can tell a lot about something based on when it was written. Is it still relevant, or is it too old where things have kind of changed a lot since then? The relevance should also be there. So you want to make sure that the information in that particular source is relevant and applicable to your needs, right? Authority refers to the author and their sources. So does the author have the authority to discuss this issue? And is the information that they're using consistently cited? And does it seem to come from credible sources? So authority is very important here. You should also look for accuracy. So is the information presented reliable, truth? Is it, truthful, and is it correct? So we need to make sure that the content that's presented is accurate. Lastly, we also want to look at the purpose. So why is this particular, video or article giving me the information that it is? And this could be something like, they just want to educate us about an issue. Maybe they want to persuade us to believe or think or feel something. So it's important to know your author's purpose. And when you put all of these together, it gives you the tools that you need to complete a pretty solid evaluation. So if we just briefly look at all of these different criteria in Hidden in Plain Sight, then it should give us the tools that we need to effectively decide, what this particular source brings to the table, where its strengths are and where its weaknesses are. So by looking at just the first page of the article, I can see that it's published in 2010, so it's not very current. However, the issues that are addressed are still relevant, so that's something to consider, right? Human trafficking definitely still exists. There are still lots of things that the authors discuss, such as where this happens, who it happens to, different ways that it happens, and all of that kind of stuff that are still very much the same today as they were in 2010. So while this might be a deal breaker for something, maybe a scientific article where things are changing and something from 2010 might be very outdated, in this case, I think that it needs to be mentioned. However, it also needs to be mentioned that these issues are still relevant, and many of them, unfortunately, are still the same. So there are some issues having to do with the currency of the article that we do need to be aware of. The next thing that I would look for is the relevance. How relevant is the information that's presented here? Well, we're talking about human trafficking, so it's very relevant to the topic. It stays on topic the entire time and talks all about human trafficking. It talks about all of these different things here and more. I just listed a few. So it addresses obstacles that hinder prosecuting human traffickers. It discusses ways all types of people are lured into and kept in trafficking situations. It argues that this happens everywhere, not just in developing countries. However, it doesn't address our area specifically, so it's missing that particular type of relevance. But maybe one of the other sources would sort of fill us in on that. I would have to look into it, right, as a student. So notice that as I am looking at each of these topics, I'm also pulling information from the source itself, because when the time comes to write the essay, I need to not only say this is relevant because it does these things, but I also need to show my readers that, right? So I need to use evidence. So these are just quotes from the article itself that I could go on to use and use those in my paragraphs in my essay as evidence to show that this addresses obstacles that hinder prosecuting human traffickers, and then maybe I would find a quote that talks about that, right? So make sure that you're also pulling evidence as you're doing your evaluation. The next part of the CRAP test has to do with authority. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're looking at authority, you're looking at the authority of the people who have written the article. And in this case, we have two different authors who collaborated together. One is Stephanie Hepburn. The other is Rita Simon. The authors do seem to have authority to speak on this issue, since their work is published in a scholarly journal and it is peer-reviewed. However, since it's old, it's from 2010, I would want to go ahead and research the authors briefly to make sure that these people are still, experts in their field, that they're still working in the field, and so on. So just a quick Google search for the authors' names has shown me that, yeah, they do have, more relevant books that they're working on. They're still employed in their field, and they do have the background knowledge that is necessary to write on this particular topic. So it seems that they do have some pretty strong authority to speak on the topic. The next part of the CRAP test and the next criteria that I'm looking at is accuracy. So this is the part of, this is the particular criteria we use where we're looking at how accurate the information in the article is. So one way that you can look at that is to look at how it aligns with what others are saying about human trafficking. And the information that's presented here does align pretty well with what everybody else in all of the other articles and videos we watched or read on the subject had to say. So that is a sign of accuracy, because generally when lots of experts agree, then that's a good thing, right? Also, all of the claims that are made in the article are supported. They're always supported with outside research from other credible sources, and that's also another sign of accuracy, right? So my information here, my evidence, would be the references that are used. And if you look at the article itself, there are pages and pages of references. I think they had over 60 listed. So it's clear that they're not just making up their claims, and it's not just their opinion, but they're drawing on other experts, which is a good thing. And the last criteria that I'm looking at has to do with their purpose. So as we know, when authors write things, or when speakers perform speeches or give talks on a subject, they always have a purpose. And it seems here that the purpose is mainly educational. The authors do seem to be a bit biased because they believe that this is a problem from the start. However, human trafficking being viewed as a problem is a very commonly held position, so it's not out of the ordinary for them to have that particular bias. All of their opinions that they do reveal in their writing are also well researched, and it's not that they're, trying to hide their purpose, right? So that's a good thing, which tends to make a source seem more credible, because they do make their purpose clear from the beginning, and they're not trying to hide any biases from us. And then again, their beliefs are supported throughout, which helps in terms of achieving their purpose, which is to educate. And then we've got an example here where they make a claim, and then they also let us know where that information comes from, right? So make sure that when you're discussing each of the different criteria, you're also pulling that evidence to show, if I say that they are supporting their claims, then I should also have an example of that to show my readers that they are indeed supporting their claims. So overall, if I were to be evaluating Hidden in Plain Sight, some of the pros: it passes the CRAP test, right? Because it does have credible and relevant information. It brings an overall broad understanding of the issue to the table. It educates us about who, where, and why human trafficking happens. And it also defines lots of specialized terms we should know to discuss the issue. So those are a few of the pros that I might discuss in my essay if I were writing about this. And then I'd also be sure to mention those cons, right? So the article's old. It's from 2010, and things may have changed in some places. It is a bit biased. However, that's somewhat expected given the nature of the topic. So for each of the sources that you're looking at, it would be a good idea to go through and look at how well that particular source performs on this CRAP test, what it brings to the table in terms of our understanding of the issue, what its purpose is, and then also you would want to look at how it relates to the other sources about that same topic. So a quick recap of what to do when you're evaluating your sources. Just a reminder to first read for understanding and annotate. Then remember that your overall purpose is to discuss how each source goes about helping us understand the issue and sort of what it brings to the table. Make sure that you're using clear criteria to evaluate. Again, I recommend using the CRAP test criteria. Make claims about how the source helps us better understand the issue as a whole. And don't forget to support those claims with evidence from the text. So for example, if I claim that the authors have authority to educate us on this subject, I might also mention that they're both scholars in their fields and have continued to publish books on the subject. Remember to evaluate each source independently, then you're going to bring those evaluations together to form one cohesive essay, And the goal of that essay is to help us understand how each source contributes to our overall understanding of the topic at hand. All right, as always, questions, if you need help, don't forget to reach out to your group, to tutors that we have available, and also to me.